Okay, I don't use a lot of scents, but I'm going to do a short video on, well, short to me could be 10 minutes. Short video on scents. I used to use scents in the 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s a little bit, but I had more negative stuff happen to me with scents, with doe and heat and doe urine, buck urines, you know, coon cover scents, skunk cover scents. I had more negatives than I had positives. You know, I'd be using a doe and estrus, and a doe would come in, because usually I'm hunting at a destination location. A doe would come in and, you know, and she doesn't want anything to do with a doe and heat because it's going to attract bucks. So she'd spook and leave, or I'd put, you know, buck urine down, and again, does don't want anything to do with bucks, especially if it's a dominant buck odor, and they're going to snort and spook and leave. And obviously when they snort, they make noise and they scare everything else away. So I rarely use scents in Michigan, extremely rare in Michigan. I will use them when I go out of state because there's a lot less hunting pressure, and there's a lot more dominant bucks and mature bucks, and you know, there's a lot of does. So the age structure of the herd is a lot more balanced than it is in Michigan and in heavily pressured states. So I do use it out of state. There are a couple of things that I still do use, and they're off real deer. I use tarsals a lot. So first I'm going to talk about stuff that I do use. When I talk about tarsals, anytime I kill a deer, I cut the tarsals off. And that's that little tuft of fur down here on the inside of their hind leg. And it looks kind of like this. And what I will do, depending on the time of year, even if it's a doe, I'll write on their early season doe, and I'll shrink wrap them. You know, just like you're shrink wrapping meat, venison, when you shrink wrap it, so it lasts a long time. And then on the back of the actual package, I will put, this one here is doe from 2018, early season. So this is an early season doe, so I might take this out and use this just as a cover odor to make deer feel comfortable coming in, like there was another deer there prior to them coming in. I will also potentially use this as a deer drag with a buck tarsal. But typically if I'm going to do that, I'm going to use a doe closer to late October, early November. You know, and typically when I get those, I cut those off a dead deer I find on the road. Because you can cut tarsals off roadkills as long as, you know, they're not more than, you know, a day old roadkills. And in Michigan, we have over 70,000 reported roadkills a year. That's where they actually call the police and they come out and take the deer away. So there's lots and lots of roadkills in Michigan. We got lots of deer, we just don't have a lot of big bucks. So don't be shy to cut tarsals, whether it be off a buck or a doe or whatever, off of a deer. Put it in some form of a Ziploc bag and then shrink wrap them and mark the time that the deer was killed. So tarsals work great. I've killed a couple bucks in Michigan where I actually laid a buck tarsal down, and I'm talking a buck that I had shot that was a mature buck from previous year or 2 years. You know, they last 3 or 4 years when you shrink wrap them. And I've actually did a scent drag because I wear scent locks, so I'm not worried about my human odor. I'll do a scent drag from 2 different directions to my location, especially if it's like at a primary scrape area. That way if a buck comes out and comes out 100 yards away and he's not coming to the scrape area, but he cuts a track and he is the dominant buck in the area, there's a possibility he's going to turn and cut and follow that track, just like a beagle on a rabbit. And 2 times I've had that happen. One was a 140 incher and one was a 130 incher. These 2 Michigan 10 points were taken as a direct result of using a tarsal drag from about 50 to 100 yards to the tree from 2 directions. Shot them at, you know, both of them at about 12 yards because that's where I physically hung the tarsal in the tree over a scrape. You know, that's where I hung it when I got in the tree to hunt after I did the drags. So tarsals work great and they're real. Just cut working a licking branch over a scrape. He's not going to give up on that tarsal. So tarsals work great and they're real. There's not going to be any bacteria on it if you take it off a deer and you shrink wrap it relatively soon after it was shot. That's the one downside with a lot of the urines. They're usually taken in June or July and they're taken in 55-gallon drums and there's bacteria in them, and when they're putting them into jars where you open the jar, you close the jar, you're letting air in there, and that air is going to eventually cause bacteria. So that's something I did want to talk about, because the only company that I know of that actually sells urines with very minimal, if any, bacteria is Tinks. Tinks bottles a 69 doe and rut. I think 69 was the actual first, doe and estrus urine ever taken off deer, sold back in the 70s, I believe. I think they were the first ones to do that. But anyway, when you get these foggers or these misters, there actually is a sleeve of urine inside of this can. So when you press the mister, there is no air that gets to that sleeve of urine inside. So the can is pressurized, and when you push this, it actually allows a certain amount of urine to go out. If you use like a buck bomb, which Tinks used to make buck bombs, pretty close to half of what's expelling out the nozzle is a propellant, which has obviously a foreign odor, and it could ruin the odor that you're trying to use to attract other deer. So keep that in mind. Buck bombs, they use a propellant to actually expel the odor. The propellant is mixed right in with the urine. This one here is totally different, where it's a pressurized can. The urine is totally encapsulated in a sleeve inside this can, so it only lets out the urine, and the urine cannot get any air, so it's not going to gather any bacteria like it would if it was in liquid form in a jar, where you're opening it up, closing it up, opening it up, closing it up, and you're letting air in there. And bacteria is something where if urine gets a little tainted, we're not going to probably notice it, but a deer very well might, especially a mature buck that's very cautious on anything he responds to. So be very cautious with urines. I will, when I'm out of state, hunting in a scrape area, I will use Tink's mister. This one here is a fogger actually, but they do a mister as well. I'll use that in the scrape, and they also make a buck urine as well, and works exactly the same way. As far as drags, if I'm going to use a commercial scent on a drag, which I used to do a lot, and I only do that now when I'm out of state, I actually will have these little ropes, and I keep these washed, and I keep them in a scent-free Ziploc bag, and I put a safety pin on the end. And what I will use, as opposed to, like, this here is a Tink's dragger. I'm not a big fan of draggers, because draggers, once you use them one time, you know, you're supposed to wash them out and use them again. Well, there's going to be bacteria. That's never going to smell the same after you use it once. Plus, I don't know how well that fabric in there was taken care of. That may have a foul odor in that fabric, and then when I put urine on it and use it as a drag, it's going to have that foul odor. So what I will typically do is I'll buy tampons, ladies' tampons. Doesn't matter the size, but I'll cut them into pieces. So there's some tampons as well. And so what I'll do is, with the safety pin on my string that I'm going to use as a drag, I'll actually put whatever odor I want to use on the tampon, because these are pretty dang clean when you buy them. I'll put the odor on the tampon and pin it to the actual end of the string, wherever that string went. So if I am going to use some form of a commercial scent like these here, where I'm going to actually physically spray it onto this tampon and use it as a drag when I'm out of state hunting, that's what I use, tampons. I just feel like they're going to be a lot cleaner. You're going to have a lot less chance of having foreign odors. Because one thing about mature bucks, especially in heavily pressured areas, if you're hunting at a destination location and there's a foreign odor there, and he's coming in, and lots of times they'll come in from downwind, and I'm not worried about them winding me, but if they're coming in from downwind, if they smell something foreign to that location, something that's not supposed to be there, even though it's not human odor, there's an excellent chance he'll turn around and leave. So you don't want to booger a location up with, you know, to me, in a heavily pressured state, I don't like to booger it up with scents, because I just don't have the confidence in those scents not being boogered up from the manufacturer or from something that I would put it on. But tampons are pretty clean. Let's see, what else? So I got cover scents. Yep, got to talk about cover scents. They used to sell a lot of skunk cover scent. They still sell coon, obviously evergreen, apple. They sell doe cover scents. I'm not a big fan of cover scents because they're pretty strong, and a lot of people will use a cover scent in an area where that particular cover scent doesn't exist. They may use you know, a pine cover scent in an area where there's no pines, or apple where there's no apple trees, or when you're using other animals like coon. I'll never forget, I was on a hunt one time on public land, and I walked by this dude in the parking lot, and he smelled like 50 raccoons peed on him. I mean, his urine, coon urine odor was so strong, and for somebody to think that that's not going to arouse a mature buck's senses, you're crazy, because it's just too strong. If it's something subtle, there's a few drops where you're trying to do some cover scent, that may be one thing. But when you do something that's overpowering and they smell a lot of it, that's going to alter their mindset, and they're not going to come into that destination location. They're not going to come into that spot on the merits you chose that for. So, you know, when you're using cover scents, make sure you're using the right type of cover scent for the area that you're hunting and that exists, and don't overdo it. Don't overpower everything. That's another thing. Even when people are using urines, they tend to use too much. Deer have really, really good noses, and it doesn't take a whole lot of it for them to smell it. So you don't have to put enough on there where you personally have to be able to smell it, because you just want it to be something as some form of a cover scent if you're concerned about wind and getting busted yourself. I personally am not, so I don't use cover scents. Obviously, the time of year, you wouldn't use an estrus scent early in the season because does aren't in estrus at that time of year. So it's going to be more apt to spook other does. If you're hunting at a primary scrape area, always hunt it clean the first time or two. And then if you do want to booger it up with some scents, you know, if you want to put some doe and estrus, a little dab of doe and estrus, or maybe some buck urine scent in the scrape, there's another company out there, his name is Smokey. I met him at a show, and he actually sells bottled preorbital gland scent. And it's what they use when they're working licking branches. They'll rub that preorbital gland on the licking branch, so that leaves an odor. And I don't know of anybody else that makes that. It's other than that Smokey guy, and he's a long-time trapper. So I can't fathom that would hurt if you just put a drop up on a licking branch. Just a little more something if you're making a mock scrape, or you're, you know, boogering up a scrape that's already there. You know, I can't see if you just use a tiny amount of that preorbital gland, because that's what he gets it from. He actually goes to places where they butcher deer. He cuts the preorbital glands out, and that's what he makes that from. So it's not some kind of synthetic mixture. It's actual preorbital gland odor. Other than that, you know, to me, you're always going to have your best success the cleaner you hunt. But there are times when it doesn't hurt to try and use a scent drag, you know, maybe some sort of a lure, an estrus, as long as it doesn't have a lot of bacteria in it. They can work. Obviously, lots of people have killed a lot of deer doing that. So, but I will say this. As far as I know, Tinks is the only one that sells one. You get 100% urine. There's no additives to it whatsoever. And it's enclosed, so you're not going to get the bacteria in it. And that's about it.